Every day, we see warning signs that this country is inching closer and closer to, dare I say it, civil war. Violent protests by radical leftists, armed attacks on ICE facilities, police officers heckled and pelted while executing arrests, even elected members of Congress crashing political events, and the media justifies or ignores it. Unless we change course, the result is inevitable. And though civil war is far from guaranteed, we are in a cycle of violent weather that is unmistakable. Earthquakes, hurricanes, and more. Almost every American is at risk in some form. And that's why I prepare with My Patriot Supply. They've revolutionized preparedness with an industry-leading line of food storage, water filtration, and other products that you will need at some point. And right now, you can save 50% on a 2-week emergency food kit. These 2-week food kits include breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and they last up to 25 years in storage. Don't ignore the writing on the wall. Give yourself peace of mind and save 50% off at my special website, preparewithredpill78.com. That's preparewithredpill78.com. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, I am joined by two special guests. The first is my good friend and fellow researcher, Methods. Methods, how are you doing?
Doing good, bud. How about yourself?
I'm awesome. Thank you very much for being here with this. And then my second special guest is a law enforcement professional. Her name is Shayna, and she has a lot of detailed information regarding, the insides of prisons, suicide watch, things that we should be expecting, especially in a high-profile case such as with Jeffrey Epstein, that we all just witnessed implode over this last weekend, or, seemingly implode. Shayna, how are you today?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you guys?
Excellent. Well, Shayna, can you just give the audience a little introduction to yourself and tell us what exactly is your background?
Absolutely. I worked for a decade and a half in jail setting, a county jail setting, so this isn't federal. However, I would think that the policies, procedures, rules, and regulations would be similar, if not the same, in those types of environments. And people put prisons and jails, and they kind of intertwine those as the same, and they're really not. Prison is for people who have already been sentenced. Pre-sentenced inmates usually are in county jails, and prisoners are usually in prisons. So,
I would almost think that the prison environment would be even more secure, more strict in terms of the procedures that they have in place, just because of the fact that people have already been sentenced and they are, they're officially, lawbreakers. They're not just accused of it.
yes and no. Once someone's sentenced, it's almost less stressful for them because they now have to kind of admit, like, okay, well, I'm going to be in prison for the rest of, forever, for however long. Pre-sentence is sometimes more difficult because you really don't know. It's the unexpected. It's the unknown. It's, am I going to be found guilty? How long am I going to be sentenced for? And those kind of things. So I guess what I want to get into is like the booking procedure. As soon as someone's brought in, you look at their charges, you look at all that stuff, you ask them a ton of questions, medical, mental health, and you name it. And then they are put into a classification system. And they're in pre-class for 72 hours. And then within that 72 hours, they'll be visited by a classification person who will talk to them and go over even more questions, like, their history and things like that. And you just keep going through all of these different things. And for that 72 hours, we keep a close eye on them. We, as far as the checking on them part, you're supposed to go in and check on them at frequent, irregular intervals. And it should be within every 30 minutes. But that doesn't mean you go in every 30 minutes to check on them. That means that you go at frequent, irregular intervals so that you are not forming a pattern. And once you get into a pattern, that's when you're looking at people getting, once they learn your pattern, they're going to know, like, okay, well, he's going to be back in half an hour. And I can tell you from the one successful suicide that I had at one place, the gentleman who committed suicide. He waited until that deputy walked past the door, and then he did it. And on their next check is when they found him. And so, I mean, it's really frustrating when that kind of a thing happens. But that brings me to my next issue with this whole thing too, is if they determine that he was dead at the scene, that becomes a crime scene. And the Department of Justice is called in to do their investigation.
Methods, did you have a question?
So when you say by crime scene, that means that he should not have been moved out of there. Nothing should have been touched. It should be left as is before, because I know that before the investigation was opened into why and what happened, he was already allegedly being wheeled out. So that's not what should have happened, right?
Well, based on what I've read and what the different things that I've seen, they were saying initially that he was dead. So why are they giving him CPR and things like that? For example, if someone has something tied around their neck, policy and procedure is, I mean, if their face is purple, you pretty much know that they're dead, right? We're trained to respond to these kind of things. And there's a specific knife that is curved, and you slide that up so that you're not untying the knot. You slide that up and you cut it off of them, because that is evidence. If they are actually dead, I mean, obviously you want to make sure, I suppose you could try CPR and things like that, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, if they said that he was cold to the touch and things like that, the guy's dead. I mean, why would you remove him and then keep trying, the CPR on him? It just boggles my mind.
I think it's even more than that. I believe that I had read that rigor mortis had set in. So there's absolutely no possibility of reviving someone if they've been dead long enough for their body to set up. So I thought that was very strange myself, that they would remove him from that active crime scene and take him and do life-saving procedures, at the hospital. If a person is in a position where they have previously been on suicide watch, have you ever seen a situation where guards did not go check on an inmate?
No, as a matter of fact, if the other thing I heard too was that the people were coming in to do maintenance. Now think about this. They're going to do maintenance in the middle of the night on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, and they're going to tell the guards, "Oh, just walk away." I can tell you from experience that if there was any maintenance to be done, we would go in there with them for their protection and for the inmates' protection, because those are weapons. I mean, if they're carrying tools, etc., you don't want those getting in the hands of your inmates. And you would lock them down, you would make sure no one's out, etc. And it becomes a personal liability. So if there is an attempted suicide, successful suicide, there are so many reports and paperwork and documentation that you have to do, and everything is criticized and critiqued, and people can be held personally liable, which is astounding to me that someone would actually walk away from their job and say, "Oh, well, maintenance said, let's just walk away."
In a situation like that, I would imagine there's a hierarchy of command. Where would maintenance workers fall in the hierarchy of command within a prison system like that, or the MCC?
The very bottom. I wouldn't follow my orders from them.
If someone was to have taken orders from maintenance like that, would there be a disciplinary procedure that they might find themselves going through as a result of a prisoner having killed themselves?
Oh, I absolutely would hope so. I mean, I can't even imagine that would fly in any way, shape, or form.
Now, with regard to the fact that there were no cameras pointed, well, no, they said that there were no cameras in the cell, first of all, but then also the fact that the cameras malfunctioned, quote unquote malfunctioned. How often does a camera malfunction happen in a system like that?
It can happen. However, they would have known about that prior to, I would imagine, prior to this happening. And I don't know, maybe maintenance was supposedly working on that. But again, you're going to be going in and doing more checks if there's actually something wrong with the cameras, I would think. And especially with someone who's so high profile and someone who has either allegedly tried to commit suicide before and or been placed in a cell with a I don't know, ex-cop who killed 4 people allegedly, and was dealing drugs. I think you'd want to check on him a little more often. And it still boggles my mind that they would move someone out of his cell on a Friday night, and then he just happens to kill himself the next day. So as far as the cameras go, there are cameras everywhere, whether they're stationary or they're movable. And you, depending on when the facility was built, most of these places are like pods. They have regular cell doors. They don't have like bars anymore. And inside the cell, they could have either concrete bunks, or they could have metal bunks that are literally attached to the concrete. So there's really nothing to, tie anything up, and most of the cells are super high. And granted, if there's 2 bunks in there, you could probably get high, but there's nothing to hook on to. We did have someone who tied a sheet to a fire sprinkler, which just made the sprinkler go off, which was not fun. But that's not going to hold you up.
I believe the autopsy report was released yesterday, and what they stated was that Epstein tied his sheet to the top bunk and then leaned forward towards the ground. So it sounds like he slowly asphyxiated, and just because he was left alone for over 3 hours without any checks, that's how he was able to kill himself. But with regard to the cameras, I would think that they would want to have, at least one fail-safe system, or at least some type of immediate notification system if the initial system was to fail. Would there ever be anything like that in place, or is it just a single wired camera system and then it doesn't work and nobody's looking at it, so then nobody knows?
There is always someone responsible for the cameras. For example, you have central control, at least in the place I worked, and then you had that certain pod. You had a control area, and both areas have access to those cameras. So if you had a camera that went out, for example, in one pod, there's 2 cameras, and they changed those over to be movable cameras because we had some issues with people going in the blind spots, and the inmates figure out pretty quickly where the blind spots are and things like that. So, they have 24 hours to figure out, how to trick us, and it's a big cat and mouse game. But I can't imagine that, they wouldn't know that a camera is out. And if there was a camera out, they should be doing more checks.
Let me ask you this. How would you have ran watching him, keeping an eye on him? What would a day in his life be in that federal prison if you were looking over? How many times would he be checked? Things of that nature.
With him being such a high-profile person, give you an example, we had a fairly high-profile person, and I'm not going to go into details because that would dox myself, but that individual was kept in solitary on pretty strict, pretty strict checks. And that was done for several months because we were concerned about possible suicide, possible inmates hurting that person, etc. And you're always watching for something like that. For example, put them in a smaller pod. Make sure that you're putting them with someone that will kind of keep an eye on them, and make sure that they alert you if there's any issues. And everyone kind of knows you get to know your clientele, and you have certain people that you would put that person with to make sure that nothing happens to them. And again, I go back to this whole idea that they have Epstein with a guy who allegedly murdered 4 people and is a cocaine dealer and an ex-cop. The idea that they would put him anywhere near this guy is just that's unheard of. That would never happen. Another thing too is, I guess with him, I would probably make sure that, we've also had people that were on strict 24-hour checks where a chair was set outside the cell and you had to write down every 5 minutes what that person was doing. So if you have someone who is at high risk of being harmed, you need to take care of them. That's your responsibility. Safety and security is number one.
In this particular instance where he was initially either tried to commit suicide or was attacked, if an inmate is at risk of being attacked by other inmates, is there any kind of procedure to safeguard them to make sure that they're able to see their day in court? Or is it a practical matter that you're going to allow them to be in a position where they can be attacked? Like, as for instance, Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger actually was incidentally placed in a cell with someone who was known for killing rats for the mafia. So once he was put into this same area along with this guy, he was killed pretty quickly, and that was it for Whitey Bulger. Is that like a normal thing? I mean, it seems like Epstein, they would have wanted to protect him. So if he had been attacked previously, or even with the maybe the potential suicide, it seems like they would want to continue to protect him and make sure that he would be safe so that he could see justice.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, if there was someone that high profile, they would not be placed in a position where they would have the opportunity to be killed and or to be have the ability to hang themselves. And I've heard a lot of talk, and we never use these in our facility, about giving him a paper sheet. While that's possible, normal, at least what I'm familiar with, is that there's a suicide smock. I mean, the thing weighs a good 10 pounds. And the blanket they're given is a suicide blanket, which again weighs probably about 10 pounds. And there's no way to tie that up or do anything else. People have tried to do stuff with them, but it's virtually impossible. I mean, and I say that with a little bit of hesitancy because if someone is really determined to kill themselves, they're going to find a way to do it. As far as them saying that he tied his sheet, I'd have to see the cell to the top bunk and lean forward. It's always possible because I've heard of circumstances where people have tied a sheet to their feet and then around their neck and just lean forward, and they were successful, which is really bizarre.
Methods?
Well, to me, it sounds like with everything that you've been saying, how it wouldn't necessarily be a failure at their job. This is such a big, high-profile person, and the example you gave, I imagine, probably wasn't even this big, high-profile because everybody kind of knows the name Epstein even before all this. So, to me, I would venture to say that this was more of a setup situation for this to occur. I mean, I imagine, I'll call them black hats or the other side, would benefit more from him being dead. So I would like to hear your opinion. I know that we're speculating. There's a lot of talk of him being taken, elsewhere, and he's somewhere under Guantanamo or something like that. But let's just talk hypothetically that he is indeed dead. Do you believe that he was either set up to be killed or given the opportunity to do so, based off of what you've heard?
Anything is possible, and with a determined person, I mean, if you look at the people who would have most likely wanted him dead, I mean, look at the body count is huge. And I think we all know who we're talking about. It's just, there's so many things that run through my mind because that wasn't the only person in there that was high profile. Think about it. Think about all the people that were in there. You had the biggest drug dealer ever in there. I mean, he was just transferred out. You have all of these people who have been in there and they were safe. So it just makes you wonder, like, what was different about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, granted, he is a quote unquote an alleged pedophile. They usually don't last long in prison. However, there's also a bigger risk for those type of people, which again, classification, they do an amazing job on figuring out the ones who are at high risk. And they are going to keep them out of a position where they are going to get injured or killed, or are able to kill themselves. I mean, they're going to make sure. I mean, we do morning briefing. Every shift gets a briefing, and anything that comes up during that shift that's a concern, you're briefed on it and made aware of it. So the idea that he wasn't checked on for 3 hours is complete irresponsibility, and those people should be fired and held personally liable. And then you go back to they're saying that one of them wasn't even a corrections officer. That's not possible. You don't just, you know what, hey, buddy off the street, come here. We're going to use you tonight because we're short-staffed. I can tell you, you're always short-staffed in corrections, in law enforcement, period. You work a lot of overtime. That's no excuse for not doing your job. I just don't understand that.
Since we're speculating, can you maybe comment on the number of people or positions of people within this facility that might have had to have been aware if there was some type of plan afoot to either get him into a position where he could be killed and then removed, perhaps removed under the guise of being dead, or perhaps just put in a position where he could kill himself? I mean, obviously the guards who are right there, we already know about these supposed maintenance men who were doing work in the middle of the night on a Friday night, early Saturday morning. And then you mentioned, that people would be watching those monitors showing the camera activity. Would there be any other people in the prison that could potentially or would have necessarily had to have been in on this plot?
I would say there would have to be a good amount of people who would have had to have turned a blind eye to it. I mean, you're talking about several different control areas, doors, letting people in and out of the doors. There's cameras on every single one of the doors. So you have to know who you're letting in, who you're letting out, why, and etc. And the amount of people that had to be involved is staggering. I would even say that probably goes up to, you think about all the supervisors and things like that. What were they doing? Why are they not checking on their staff? Why are they not aware that maintenance is doing their thing at that time of the hour? I mean, it's just all, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. None of this makes any sense. And hat tip to Tracy Beans too. She was talking about his uniform and the fact that we see that he was wearing orange. Apparently that is not normal. They only issue this green and or brown based on an article that was written from an inmate who had been there. So, and even on the commissary, they don't allow orange. So none of it makes any sense.
So we're talking more about a potentially corrupt system there, that this could have maybe been done before to a lesser profile, known publicly guy. Could be more of a corrupted environment.
Well, you have to think about how many positions that they have to fill. And being a corrections officer is not always the most glamorous thing. Most people I know use it as a stepping stone to get into to become a police officer or what have you. Unfortunately, they don't get the respect I think that they really, really deserve, because they're so hardworking and dedicated. But this is in New York, and there's a lot of positions to fill. So you sometimes wonder if they're lowering the bar, if you will, to get people on board to do this job. And in any situation like that, there is a risk of being paid off. There is the risk of taking bribes, and that's why you don't share any personal information. You don't get close with the people that you're supposed to be taking care of. You don't talk to them like you would a normal person. You have to name, rank, serial number kind of a thing. So yeah, all of this is really, really interesting and bizarre. People can be bought off, but I want to say that most people go into this line of work because this is what they want to do and would never ever do that. You're talking about maybe 1% that would, I guess, go through. I couldn't live with myself if I allowed someone to be killed on my watch. I can just say that.
Well, I don't personally have any other questions. Methods, do you have anything else that you wanted to ask?
I think we pretty much covered it. The only other thing I would want to ask is, have you witnessed anybody that you've worked with take bribes or do anything like what you were just talking about?
I personally have not, but I do know that in some of the other type of corrections fields, women at times can be more vulnerable than men because you have that group of people, usually sexual predators, who are very manipulative, and women are more emotional, and I hate to say it, can at times be manipulated easier. And so I do know of one situation where this gal had apparently fallen in love with the sexual predator and was writing love notes to him and things like that. And she was promptly fired and prosecuted. So these are the things that we can't tolerate or put up with. And so you kind of have that issue when you're hiring people too.
I remember a story from a couple years back where a female employee inside of a correctional facility, I believe that she helped 2 male inmates to escape with the idea that she was going to then meet up with them and they were having a love affair or something like that. So, yeah, I think that with matters of the heart, we all have to be careful.
Unfortunately, it does happen. And yeah, you have to, once you start falling for that kind of thing, you're pretty much dead in the water. I mean, you cannot let that, you can't go there. You can't. And what we always told people in jail school and things like that is, even if for some reason you bring something in, admit to it immediately and say, you know what, this is what I've done. Because once you even bring, like, okay, say you bring in a cigarette for them, now they got you because you can get fired. And you're setting yourself up for bringing in other things. Not only that, but I also go back to thinking he was with his attorneys up to 12 hours a day. And it's very interesting to me because attorneys pose a different kind of issue. They are allowed by law to see their attorneys privately, and it's not recorded, it's not listened to, and it's not even, visually watched. So there are circumstances where attorneys have given weapons, have given tools to help them try to escape, etc. So it's not unheard of. So that's an interesting take too, I think, or an interesting rabbit hole to go down, is what did his attorneys know? And I mean, it sounds like he had talked to his attorneys and they convinced someone to take him off suicide watch, which is bizarre to me because we don't listen to attorneys with regard to that. That's up to the medical and mental health professionals to figure out really what's going on. I mean, that's not something that we're trained for or even would make those decisions on. So it's just bizarre to me that they would let them make the decision that he should be taken off suicide watch.
Well, they did I saw a report come out that the lawyers, his longtime lawyers, just actually lawyered up themselves with criminal defense attorneys. So that's very interesting that you were to bring up that point, because they immediately jumped to getting lawyers.
Methods, we are two halves of the same mind. I was just about to say that. All right, well, listen, Shayna, I want to thank you very much for joining us. And Methods, as always, love to have you here on the program. Very happy that we were all able to do this. So I just want to thank the audience as well for joining us for this very special edition of Red Pill News. And thank you once again, Shayna, for being here with us and for giving us your perspective on what might be happening inside these prison facilities.
Thank you guys so much, and God bless. Much love.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Red Pill.
As always, this has been Red Pill 78. I am the Corruption Detector, and this was your Red Pill News. Good luck, everyone, and God bless.